All right, continuing on with graphics card mania, we got ourselves a Supreme Liquid X from MSI. I'm actually excited about this card because of the fact that it's, well, water cooled. And it's extremely reasonable in terms of size, minus the radiator, versus every other freaking card out on the market. So let's see if an AIO can tame the beast. Today's video is brought to you by the J2Sense merch store. We got t-shirts and gaming mats and mugs and all that kind of stuff. So whenever you go buy our stuff, we don't have to put other ads here and other annoying crap. So go buy our stuff. In terms of dimensions, it's actually a true 2-slot card, only it's like a quarter slot higher, which makes sense. The PCB pretty much stops right here where the back plate is, not the plastic, the rear cover area right here, but it's a very reasonably sized card, especially if you compare it to the Founders Edition, which is going to be just as tall, but a little bit longer. And then in terms of width, it's definitely wider at 3 slots. I guess, you know, it's one of those things where we kind of expected the 4090s to just be furnaces because they have availability up to 600 watts, but very few cards are actually hitting 600 watts. Even those that we've already showed with the connector, if you have all the connectors plugged in on the four pigtail one, or you're using like the custom cable from Corsair, they'll pull like 420 or 520, 530 at the most when overclocked, and then their voltage limit before power limit, so they're not gonna hit 600. And I'm sure that's by design to keep it from hitting the 600 plus. I'm not by any means saying that that's like, oh, that's not a bad wattage. That's a huge amount of wattage necessary to keep the card running and whatnot. But anyway, I've already unboxed it and taken the plastic off, as you guys can see, because I was playing around with it. It is a dual BIOS card, by the way. I want to point that out. The BIOS switch is right here in the back. And you can see you have a silent and a gaming. But let's see what else you get in the box. And you know what's funny? Packaging these days is getting so just nice. Look at this. When you open it up, it's like, whee, Supreme. I don't know why they call it Supreme instead of Supreme, but you know what? Whatever. You do get a mouse mat. So we silver and gold and gray matching the card. And then you've got your anti-static bag that the card comes in. You've got your quick start user's guide. If we remove this, we do get a, every single 4090 is gonna come with this 12 volt high power cable to a 4 PCI Express 8-pin cable. And what's funny is this one also, just like the not the EVGA, I almost said EVGA, the Founders Edition card, all 4 pins, including Sense 0 and Sense 1, are populated. And the reason for that is basically it knows when each one of these cables are connected, which we've already showed, and there's already been some back talk from those, I guess, whatever. Steve already covered all of that. All 4, it does know when these cables are connected, whether it's an ATX 2.0 power supply or not. So if you were to disconnect one of these, you're gonna limit yourself down to 450. Disconnect 2, it won't even boot on a 4090. We've already shown that. And you actually get these really nice machine-headed screws and washers for mounting the radiator to your case. Other than that, it's funny, you see this spot right here? This almost looks like where they had thought about, that slot right there, where they thought about putting some sort of a support bracket. But you know what? Not necessary. It's not necessary with this because although it's fairly weighty, it's heavier than you would expect it to be as a water-cooled card, because a lot of times they'll just have some basic little heat sink on there, keeping the chips and the VRMs cool, and then just a block touching the GPU. This is really heavy still because of the fact that it does have a solid heat sink in there. As you can see down through the fan, it has a heat sink in there touching the VRMs and the RAM. So it is a hybrid air-cooled, water-cooled card where the GPU is water-cooled, but everything else is air-cooled. So also too, in terms of the cabling, you can see that the cables here run down through the sleeve and into the graphics card itself. So the radiator fans and the GPU fans are going to be controlled by whatever GPU tuning software that you want to use. So you don't have to worry about these just kind of running at their own pace. They're going to speed up and slow down with whatever you tell the fans to do on the card. Also too, I want to point out this radiator, it's got this kind of like not really a wrinkle coat, but it has a texture coat, which is really nice in terms of showing scratches. The downside is, one, it may not match any other radiator in your system if you have another AIO, and two, this gives something for dust to catch onto. So just keep that in mind. It does end up being kind of dirty over time. In terms of the fan orientation, you can see they're in push right now, which means they're pushing air through the rad. So right now they're kind of intending for it to go like this as an exhaust on the top of your system. But if you're gonna use it as an intake on the front, and then you're gonna use a CPU exhaust, it's getting twisted on me, there we go. If you're gonna use it on the front like that, you're gonna have to flip the fans around. That way it's pulling air through the rad through the front of the case. Metal shroud, by the way. This is a true brushed metal shroud. This is not plastic. So you wanna be careful with it because this will scratch, but it looks so good like this with this two-tone black and gunmetal brushed effect. Same thing on the back plate. This is a metal backplate back here. This lights up. Phil keeps calling this the Super S, even though it's not quite the Super S, but still, it lights up. And then we have a nice shiny retention bracket here for the socket tension on the GPU. And then we have this nice kind of a gold chamfered edge here around the backplate, which just looks really nice. So it's got this really nice silver and gold kind of a theme. Not a theme I ever really considered doing on a build, but this card makes me sort of want to do now a silver, black, and gold themed build. All right, you know what we got to do now? We got to get it on our rig and fire it up. And hey, look, it actually kind of matches our Tai Chi. So I am going back to the 7950X on this, and the reason for that is I kind of want to see how it compares on the exact system that I've got my best score on so far when it comes to overclocking a 4090. Fun fact, I am way down the leaderboard now. I'm like number 50. So many 4090s have made their hands into different systems, and so much silicon lottery out there. BPS Customs like completely demolished our score by like 600 points. And I know Steve's getting ready to do some bearded hardware overclocking with him. And so I'm just gonna be kind of keeping my ear to the ground and watching what they're doing in silence. And then one day, if I do beat their scores, I'll just kind of flick it online and not really say anything. I don't think this is gonna be a quote unquote RIP GN, RIP BPS Customs type of event, only because of the fact that we are so locked down with these cards where voltage limit being a significant factor on this one. Doesn't mean we won't necessarily try, but the thing is, I don't feel like modding the card. I don't necessarily want to do any sort of shunt mods and stuff that might cause damage. That card sitting on the pegboard back there, well, not that exact one actually. The one behind it, that's the one that made Louis Rossman hiss at me because I did a bad repair on that. I did the shunt mod with liquid metal, and then I left it on there so long it corroded the solder, and then the capacitor just fell off. Not a problem usually, but with my soldering skills, it is a problem. So it's just right now with how much these cards cost and the fact that they're not the easiest to get your hands on, even at the moment, I don't want to go modifying them. All right, so we're booted up in our system. You can see that both the onboard fan as well as the fans on the radiator are stopped, and that's because of the fact that this does have 0 RPM mode. So like I said, when it comes to fan control, it's gonna mirror whatever's happening on the card. Now the pump doesn't stop. If the pump stopped, then the card would just overheat. So that's not going to be very good for performance, obviously, if it starts overheating. So the pump is always running, but what you'll notice is an idle temp with the water cooler stopped is slightly higher than any of the air-cooled cards that are sitting there with 0 RPM, and that's only because of the passive cooling capability of large heat sinks is greater than the smaller cold plate found on a water block. So that's why you'll notice at 0 RPM, it starts to kind of slowly creep up. Now in terms of noise at full speed, it's not an unpleasant sound, actually, versus the air-cooled cards. It kind of sounds like a little desk fan blowing at you. It's not really intrusive. It's not a high-pitched whine. Yeah, it's actually not that intrusive, but that's at 100% right there. Now, when we do our testing right now, I'm gonna be putting this back to factory because the factory fan curve will have an effect on performance. So this is just out of the box testing. If you were to just plop it on your system and not touch a damn thing, what would happen? What I think MSI really needs to fix, MSI Afterburner should contain the RGB control software needed to control an MSI graphics card. No, you need to download MSI Mystic Lite to do that. So another piece of software, it doesn't make sense. MSI should absolutely have it baked in. to be able to control the RGB software on any RGB graphics card, including the Founders Edition card. So I just think it's weird that their own software doesn't include control for RGB on their card. Fortunately, it's just white by default. So that's kind of nice. Now let's talk about power limit. Interestingly enough, this card maxes out at 110. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it's lower than other cards because that's 110% of its baseline. Now pretty much every custom card on the market has a higher baseline. Now the baseline is 450 watt for the Founders Edition card because that's the design. But like for instance, the Strix card from Asus is a 500 watt baseline with the power limit allowing it to go 33%, no, not 33%, 20, whatever the math works out for it to be an extra 100 watts available to it in terms of power limit. Now again, we're voltage limited before we ever hit the 600 watt. But one of the downsides about MSI graphics cards, and they've always been this way, and I don't understand what they're afraid of. Maybe they're afraid of losing that NVIDIA GPU warranty. Because remember, NVIDIA does warranty the core for 1 year for the manufacturer. So if your card dies and it's determined that the core went bad, NVIDIA pays for that warranty, not MSI. So I feel like they get really conservative with their additional limits because they're trying to keep their own pocketbook in mind when it comes to allowing overclocks and stuff. But I digress. MSI almost always has some of the best hardware design on the market, but then they gimp it with software. Now the reason why I'm pointing this out is I've already done some testing here, and that 110, do you remember how I talked about in our previous reviews how we are voltage limited, just straight up voltage limited? Power limit stays at 0 nearly the entire time. Well, check this out. Also too, in terms of temp, it went right to 55C, but look, we're still 0 RPM right here. See that? Set 57, there we go. Now they turn on, and now look how fast the temp comes down. So I'm starting to think that the pump itself might actually be slowing down to just a crawl, and then once the pump turns on, you can see how fast it shoots down. So now we're down to 43C, underwater, 45. I think it's also important to note, these temperatures, although on water, are not that much lower than air. Now, sure, if the air-cooled cards were running a package this, I don't want to say small, because it's not a small card, but if they were this small, like in a 2-slot heatsink, they'd not be able to compare with these temperatures whatsoever, that's for sure. But what I'm looking for right now is where like some of our limits are. So I'm gonna go ahead and go back to 0 on the core. One of the things that I'll tend to do to test for this is I'll pause the scene, so watch this right here. Okay, there we go. So we're at like 440 something. It's moving so fast. I wish there was a way to slow down the polling rate. Now watch this. If I zero out the RAM, watch the FPS. So it's like 430, 440, 430, and hit that. 410. So you can see we are definitely gaining FPS. 1700. There's your 430, 440. If I go 1750. It's starting to slow down now. See how we're now seeing a lot of 2s instead of 3s right there? So now we're starting to error correct. 1850, we'll probably start getting weird artifacting because it can't correct fast enough. Oh, yep, there it is. And then once it's in memory, that's it, I have to stop the test. So the memory on this card already is the highest clocking RAM I have on any of the graphics cards. Now I don't know if that's just because it's maybe being cooled better, it's just silicon lottery, I have no idea. But if we want to test power limits now, we need to open up Port Royal. The nice thing about Port Royal is it does have a windowed mode looping test, which I can use to just start testing for stability. It is a lot harder to run Port Royal than it is to run Heaven. What I'm about to show you is the fact that this card starts to show power limit around 530 watts. So there's about a 70 watt buffer in there that MSI has baked into their power limit in the VBIOS, not allowing you to be able to pull the full 600 watts, which means that they're protecting something. And I think honestly, they're protecting the warranty is what they're doing. Not that it's a bad thing, and not to mention, if I put a 4090 in my system, I will not be overclocking the core hardly at all. I'll probably do like 150 megahertz offset maybe on water. But the RAM, I would probably run like a daily 1000 megahertz offset on the RAM, just like I do on my 3090 at home now. So if you have Port Royal, you can go custom, you can go graphics test, you can go windowed full screen and looping, yes. Now the three we're gonna be paying attention to on the bottom here is GPU power limit. So power, this is in watts. This is our limit. If it's either 0 or 1. 0 means that's not our limiting factor. 1 means it's a limiting factor. And then our voltage limit down here, again, 0 means not limited, 1 means limited. So this is just a reason, and it's just a binary 0 or 1. Okay, so see how we went right up to 430 watts? Now see how we're voltage limited right here? Also notice we're at 1050 versus 1100, and that's because I haven't moved the slider. So if I move the slider, watch what's gonna happen here. I'm gonna move it to 100%, which means allow full voltage available to it at a lower part in the curve. So we're at 419, 404. Watch as soon as I hit that. Boom. 471, 472. So see, I moved the slider, which means 50 millivolts went up. Now we hit voltage limit, and check this out. There's our power limit. So now if I move the power limit to 110, now when I start to play around with my overclocks, okay, so that part of the test, look, we're hitting power limit now. See that? And look at our wattage. Where is it? 518, 513. See? We're so close. When we hit 110, we'll hit it. So now check this out. See this power limit? We're voltage and power limited. And there's a crash. So that's what's leading to me not being able to get this card to score higher, is because of the fact that with it hitting power limit, it limits the voltage quickly to bring power limit back down, which is leading to instability because of the fact that this card not being a Silicon Lottery winner is probably requiring more voltage for stability. Now this is the kind of card that might benefit from a voltage mod. But anyway, that's one of the things that's keeping me from actually being able to score really high in this particular test. So I need to drop this down to like 180 on the core, because what I need to do is I need to stop the core from spiking to a higher number. So remember, because of the P states, it can show 3060, but it might be actually trying to go to like 3090. And so it'll go down to 3060 under droop and under load, but in between scene loads or a change or a lighter scene, it might spike up really high, and then the voltage isn't high enough because we're limited to support that clock at this ASIC quality. That's the sucky part about overclocking. I wish I could take this RAM and put it in my Founders card, because that Founders card is what has my highest score so far. So now that we've kind of gone over the overclocking a little bit and I've let the card cool back down, we'll do the stock test in Port Royal to see where it scores versus the others. Then we'll find where the overclocking limit is on it. I'm curious now as to where it lands stock out of the box. Okay, so 25,980. Okay, the 4090 Strix was a 26,192. So it's like a little over 200 points higher than this. And I think that's gonna come down to, once again, the baseline power limit. I really do. Also too, it was boosting over 2860 megahertz on the Strix card. And as you can see here, we're boosting to 2775. So that score difference is entirely the boost clock. Our FE, 25,659. So this lands exactly in the middle of the Strix and the FE, which is exactly as expected because the FE was going in the low 2700s, the Strix was going in the mid 2800s, and this is in the mid 2700s at like 2775. So it's just their artificial limit. Like if I could get them to allow the power limit to go to 600, then I feel like we would get a little more clock speed out of the core. Yeah, 37,921. You see our GPU temperature is still too warm in my opinion. 51, 52, 51, 52. Let's talk about this card real quick. What it offers is a smaller package in terms of case fitment. However, you have to fit a radiator in there. So if you're running two AIOs, that means one's gonna probably be in the front of your case and one's probably gonna be at the top. It's not cheap. In fact, let's look up the price right now. $1749. So it's $250 premium for the AIO. And unfortunately, what you're getting for that is somewhat better cooling, because I mean, that's 100% fan speed right there. If I go 100% fan speed on my FE card, I'm at like 59, 60. If I go to 100% fan speed on the Strix, it's like 58, 57, depending on the ambient temperature. So it's nice in terms of acoustics, but you can see for this particular card, and by this particular card, I don't mean the model, I mean this exact sample does just not have a great Silicon Lottery winner. I hate the fact that I have to say, oh, it's only going to 3,040 megahertz or whatever. That's so much, but my other cards are exceeding 3,100. But it has the best memory overclock so far of any of the cards. Like my FE card on memory alone would not be able to get as far as this one did. So you have to ask yourself, is it worth $250 for the AIO portion of it? It looks fantastic. The metal shroud, the back plate, the front, the location of the connector, all the way back here instead of being in the middle like something stupid. The lighting on it is tasteful. It's not gaudy. It's the brushed metal on here looks just great. It's got its dual BIOS. I still don't think, I still don't think there's a need for a dual BIOS silent/gaming mode on a water-cooled card, but it's there nonetheless. I'm just personally disappointed in the overclocking capability of it because of MSI's limitation on the power limit, when the whole point of water cooling a 4090 like this would be to get more headroom. And you saw out of the box stock settings, it wasn't even boosting as high as the air-cooled Strix card. Although that card is freaking the size of a 360mm radiator, so you gotta keep that in mind. Anyway, there you go, guys. Just wanted to kind of take a look at the Supreme here. I feel like it's the kind of card, if I were to put a custom water block on and could lift the BIOS or change the BIOS out to a higher limit, it'd probably be a good card. It's not a bad card. It'd probably be a good overclocking card. And I'm not going to jump right to trying to BIOS mod this by putting another BIOS on here because I don't know exactly what BIOS are compatible with what yet. I'm gonna let other people figure it out and then I'll follow suit, because the only card I've ever bricked that was brand new was a GTX 780 because I put a B revision on an A1 revision card and completely bricked it to the point to where it wasn't even recognized as a GPU at all when plugged into the slot. And I'm not about to do that to a $1,750 card. Remember, you can build a whole system for the price of this thing. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Sound off down below how you feel about this card and what other cards you think we should take a look at. See you guys in the next one.